A little girl ran to the mountain man crying, "They're beating Mommy!" And what he did next was shocking. Snow whipped through the canyon as the child stumbled into his arms, her tiny voice breaking the silence of the wild. Down in the valley, lanterns flickered and cruel laughter echoed. A woman's screams tore through the wind. He could have turned away, most men did in those days, but instead, this lonely trapper grabbed his rifle and walked straight into hell. What he found in that shack would test not only his courage, but his soul. Because the woman they were beating wasn't just a stranger. She carried a secret that could tear the whole town apart. A hidden claim, a buried sin, and a truth no man wanted spoken. When justice itself wore a crooked badge, and mercy meant breaking the law, would one mountain man's faith be enough to save them all? Drop a comment below, and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The bitter wind howled through the frozen canyon as Grayson McCrae tracked elk prints in the fresh powder. Dawn painted the Colorado highlands in shades of steel gray, the February storm of 1881 growing fiercer by the minute. His breaths came out in white puffs as he shouldered his Winchester rifle, scanning the terrain through eyes narrowed against the stinging snow. 20 years of trapping in these mountains had taught him to read the land like a book. The elk herd had passed through recently, their tracks still sharp despite the falling snow. But something else caught his attention, making the hairs on his neck stand up. Movement, not the steady gait of elk or deer, but something erratic. Through the whirling white, a small figure emerged, stumbling and falling in the deep drifts. Grayson's heart clenched as he made out a little girl, no more than 7 years old, wearing nothing but a thin cotton nightdress. Her bare feet were blue with cold, leaving spots of blood in the pristine snow. "Good Lord," he breathed, slinging his rifle and rushing forward. The child saw him and, instead of running away, charged straight for him with desperate speed. She crashed into his legs, tiny fingers clutching his wool coat as deep sobs racked her small frame. "They're beating Mommy," she wailed, her voice nearly lost in the howling wind. Grayson dropped to one knee, his weathered hands gentle as he steadied the trembling child. Her dark hair was dusted with snow, her cheeks red from cold and tears. Something deep inside him stirred. Memories he'd tried hard to bury of another little girl, one who'd called him Papa. "Easy now, little one," he said softly, shrugging off his heavy fur cloak. He wrapped it around her shaking shoulders, noting the bruises on her arms. "What's your name?" May," she hiccuped, burrowing into the warmth of the fur. "May Beck. Please, mister, you gotta help. They're hurting her real bad." Grayson's jaw tightened as he took in her terror-filled eyes. "Where, May? Where's your mama?" "Down at the camp." She pointed through the swirling snow toward a narrow ravine that led to the mining settlement below Mercy Ridge. "Papa came home mad again. He and his friends, they—" Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. A woman's scream cut through the storm's fury, distant but clear. May flinched, pressing closer to Grayson's side. In the gray light of dawn, he could see torchlight flickering through the trees below, marking the location of the mining camp. Grayson's hand moved to the rifle at his shoulder, his finger brushing the cold metal. He'd sworn off getting involved in town troubles years ago, after what happened in Missouri. The war and its aftermath had taught him that a man could lose everything in the blink of an eye. He'd found his peace up here in the high country, trapping and prospecting, answering to no one but himself and God. But as May's small hand slipped into his, trembling with cold and fear, he knew his solitary days were about to end. The weight of his dead daughter's memory pressed upon his heart, Sarah had been about May's age when the typhoid took her and Rachel both. "Show me the way, child," he said, gathering May into his arms. She weighed hardly anything, like a half-starved bird. "Hold tight to my neck now." May clung to him as he began picking his way down the treacherous slope, following the ravine toward the mining camp. The wind cut like knives through his wool coat, but he barely felt it. His mind was already racing ahead, planning. One man against several would be risky, but he had surprise on his side, and years of tracking game had taught him to move silent as a shadow. Another scream echoed up the canyon, closer now. May whimpered, burying her face in his shoulder. "That's Mommy," she whispered. "Papa said he was going to teach her a lesson she wouldn't forget." "Not while I draw breath," Grayson muttered, more to himself than the child. The old familiar weight of the Winchester was somehow comforting now, as was the Colt revolver at his hip. He'd sworn off violence years ago, but sometimes the Lord put a man in a position where turning away wasn't an option. The ravine narrowed as they descended, rough walls of granite rising on either side. The wind's howl grew muffled here, though the snow still fell thick. Grayson's boots found purchase on the steep trail, his years in the mountains serving him well. May remained silent in his arms, shivering despite the heavy fur cloak. As they drew closer to the mining camp, Grayson could make out voices now, angry shouts and crude laughter mixing with a woman's desperate pleas. The torchlight grew brighter, casting wild shadows on the canyon walls. He set May down behind a snow-laden pine. "Stay here, little one," he whispered, adjusting the cloak more securely around her. "Don't move until I come back for you, understand?" May nodded, her eyes huge in her pale face. "Are you going to help Mommy?" "Yes." Grayson checked his rifle's action, making sure snow hadn't fouled the mechanism. "Your mama's going to be just fine." "Promise?" Her small voice quavered. Grayson paused, looking down at the child who'd thrown herself on his mercy. In her face, he saw echoes of his Sarah. The same trust, the same desperate hope. He'd failed to protect his own family all those years ago. The Lord was giving him another chance. "I promise," he said softly, touching her cheek. "Now stay quiet as a mouse." Drawing his rifle, Grayson moved forward through the whirling snow. The mining camp lay just ahead, a cluster of rough cabins and canvas tents huddled against the canyon wall. Most were dark and silent, their occupants likely still abed at this early hour. But one cabin blazed with lamplight, its door standing open despite the bitter cold. A woman's sob drifted out, followed by the sharp crack of a hand striking flesh. Grayson's grip tightened on his rifle as he crept closer, using the storm's cover to approach unseen. Through the open door, he could make out several figures, 3 men standing over a crumpled form on the floor. "Thought you could hide it from me, did you?" A man's voice, thick with whiskey and rage. "Thought I wouldn't find out about that money you've been keeping back?" "Harlan, please," the woman on the floor gasped. "I only saved it for May's schooling. She needs—" Another blow cut off her words. Grayson had seen enough. His heart pounded against his ribs, but his hands were steady as he raised the Winchester. The war had taught him the terrible clarity that comes in moments like this, when a man must choose between standing aside or stepping into the storm. He thought of May, hiding in the snow with her bare feet and trusting eyes. He thought of Sarah, of Rachel, of all the times he'd asked God why he'd taken them. Maybe this was his answer. Not peace in solitude, but purpose in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. "Lord," Grayson whispered, his finger finding the trigger. "Guide my hand." The dawn wind howled down the canyon, carrying with it the sound of a woman's desperate cry and a child's prayer for deliverance. In the growing light, a solitary figure moved through the storm, rifle raised, ready to answer that prayer with lead and courage if necessary. The peaceful life Grayson had built for himself hung by a thread, but as May's words echoed in his mind, "They're beating Mommy," he knew there was no turning back. The snow continued to fall, covering his tracks as he approached the cabin's open door, each step carrying him closer to a confrontation that would change not only his life, but the lives of a desperate mother and her brave daughter. The morning light grew stronger, though the storm showed no signs of breaking. Sometimes, Grayson reflected, the Lord's mercy came not in gentle rain, but in the heart of the tempest itself. Through the thickening storm, Grayson crouched behind a snow-laden pine at the edge of the mining camp. His keen eyes scanned the collection of rough-hewn cabins and canvas tents, tracking the movements of shadowy figures through curtains of wind-driven sleet. Night was falling fast, turning the world a haunting blend of gray and black. May huddled against him, her small frame shivering despite the heavy fur cloak. "That one," she whispered, pointing to a ramshackle hut set apart from the others. Light spilled from its crude windows, along with the sounds of drunken laughter and cruel jeers. A group of miners stood outside the hut, passing a bottle between them. Their voices carried on the bitter wind, coarse words that made Grayson's jaw clench tight. Through gaps in the weathered boards, he caught glimpses of what was happening inside. His heart turned to ice. A woman lay bound to a post, her back bearing fresh welts. Even in the dim light, Grayson could see she was Comanche, her long black hair falling forward to hide her face as she knelt there, refusing to cry out despite their torment. One of the miners raised a length of knotted rope again. "Last chance, squaw," the man slurred. "Either you warm my bed willing-like, or we'll beat some sense into that proud heart of yours." The woman lifted her head, revealing features that somehow managed to be both fierce and elegant despite her circumstances. "I am Lila Beck, a Christian woman and a widow. I will not dishonor my husband's memory or my own dignity for the likes of you." The rope whistled down. Grayson's finger tightened on his rifle's trigger, but he forced himself to wait. Rushing in without a plan would only get them all killed. He counted 5 men outside, probably more within. The odds weren't good. May's small hand clutched his sleeve. "Please, Mr. Grayson, that's my mama." Those 4 words decided him. Keeping low, he moved May behind a stack of mining timber. "Stay hidden," he whispered. "No matter what happens, don't make a sound until I come for you." She nodded, eyes huge with trust. Grayson touched her cheek once, then melted into the shadows between the buildings. The wind worked in his favor now, carrying the sound of his movement away while masking his approach with curtains of driving sleet. He positioned himself carefully, using the corner of an adjacent cabin for cover. The miners were too focused on their cruel sport to notice him. Inside the hut, Lila endured their abuse with quiet dignity that spoke of deep inner strength. Grayson had seen that same quiet courage before, in his Rachel's eyes, as she faced her final hours. Taking careful aim at the dark sky, he squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report cracked like thunder in the confined space between buildings. The miners scattered like startled rabbits, shouting in confusion as they stumbled over each other in their haste to find cover. "Next shot won't be aimed up," Grayson's voice boomed across the compound. "Clear out now while you still can." Most of the men needed no second warning. They vanished into the storm, leaving their bottles behind. But one, a burly fellow with a week's growth of beard, recovered his nerve quickly. He lunged at Grayson with a pickaxe raised high. Grayson sidestepped the clumsy attack, bringing his rifle around in a practiced motion. The heavy wooden stock connected with the miner's jaw, dropping him like a felled tree. The man sprawled unconscious in the snow, but still breathing, proof that mercy could be dealt with a firm hand when needed. Inside the hut, Lila had managed to get to her knees despite her bonds. Her eyes met Grayson's as he entered, wary but unafraid, taking his measure even in her vulnerable state. He approached slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Name's Grayson McCrae," he said softly. "Your May found me up on the ridge, asked me to help." He drew his knife, showing it to her before moving behind the post. "Gonna cut you loose now, ma'am." The ropes parted under his sharp blade. Lila's shoulders sagged as the tension released, but she made no sound of pain or relief. Grayson shrugged out of his coat, draping it gently around her shoulders to preserve her modesty and warmth. "Much obliged," she murmured, voice steady despite her ordeal. "My daughter, is she safe?" "Yes'm, hidden close by." Grayson helped her to her feet, supporting her when her legs threatened to give way. "But we need to move fast. Those men will be back with friends once their courage rebuilds." As if confirming his words, voices could be heard approaching through the storm, angry shouts and calls for revenge. Grayson guided Lila to the door, scanning the darkness. "Can you walk?" She straightened her spine, gathering her strength. "I must." They moved as quickly as her injuries allowed, Grayson leading them to where May waited. The child flew into her mother's arms with a quiet sob of relief. Lila held her close, murmuring soft words in Comanche while Grayson kept watch. More miners were gathering now, dark shapes moving through the curtain of sleet, carrying lanterns and weapons. The storm that had hidden Grayson's approach now worked against them, limiting visibility and making it hard to gauge where the search parties were. "There's a trail up through the rocks," he whispered. "Leads to my cabin in the high country. It's rough going, but the storm will cover our tracks." Lila nodded, but her face was drawn with pain. Without another word, Grayson scooped her into his arms. She was surprisingly light, like May had been, as if hardship had burned away everything but spirit and determination. "Hold tight to my coat, May," he instructed. "Don't let go, no matter what." The child gripped the rough fabric with small, determined hands. Together they began the arduous climb up into the mountains. The wind howled around them, driving particles of ice that stung like needles. But it also masked the sound of their passage and filled their tracks almost as soon as they were made. Grayson picked his way carefully through the darkness, every sense alert for pursuit. The weight of Lila in his arms and the tug of May's grip on his coat anchored him to his purpose. This was why the Lord had placed him on that ridge this morning, not to hunt elk, but to help these two souls in desperate need. Behind them, lantern light bobbed through the storm as search parties combed the mining camp. But Grayson knew these mountains like he knew his own heart. Every tree, every boulder, every treacherous slope was familiar territory to him. He led them higher, away from the voices and lights, into the wild sanctuary of the high country. Lila stirred in his arms. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk yourself for strangers?" Grayson was quiet for a long moment, finding his way around a snow-covered deadfall before answering. "Because it's what decent folks do, and because I've seen too many good people suffer while others stood aside. Most would not consider a Comanche woman worth such risk. Most ain't walked the paths I have." Grayson adjusted his grip, making sure she was secure. "Lost my own wife and daughter years back. Learned the hard way that a person's worth ain't measured by the color of their skin or the language of their prayers." May pressed closer to his side, as they climbed higher into the gathering night. The storm raged around them, but Grayson's steps remained sure and steady. The rough track gradually became steeper, winding between towering pines crusted with ice and snow. Below, the mining camp was now just a dim glow through the curtain of sleet. The angry voices had faded, replaced by the moan of wind through the crags and the soft crunch of snow beneath Grayson's boots. The storm was their ally now, erasing all sign of their passage as they climbed toward safety. Lila's head rested against his shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady. May stumbled occasionally on the rough ground, but her grip never loosened from his coat. Together they ascended into the wild heart of the mountains, where Grayson had found his peace years ago. Now that solitude would become sanctuary for these two souls who had placed their trust in him. The wind picked up, driving the sleet harder. But Grayson knew they were close now. Just ahead, hidden in a protected hollow, his cabin waited, a haven of warmth and security in the wilderness. The storm closed in behind them like a heavy curtain, hiding their trail from any who might try to follow. In his arms, Lila murmured a quiet prayer in Comanche. Though Grayson didn't understand the words, he recognized the tone of gratitude. May's small hand found his, squeezing tight as they made their way through the darkness toward shelter and hope. The night deepened around them as they climbed, but Grayson's step never faltered. He had sworn to protect them, and by God's grace, he would see that promise through. The storm raged on, masking their escape into the high country where his hidden cabin waited, a sanctuary where healing could begin. The night had deepened to pitch black by the time Grayson's cabin came into view. Through the swirling snow, its low-slung log walls emerged like a solid shadow against the white landscape. A thin stream, now frozen solid, curved past the cabin's western edge, its ice gleaming faintly in the darkness. Grayson shifted Lila's weight in his arms, her breath coming in shallow gasps against his shoulder. May still clung to his coat, her small fingers nearly frozen stiff from the long climb. He guided them toward the cabin's door, speaking softly to keep May close. "Almost there, child. Just a few more steps now." The door creaked open at his push, and the familiar smell of pine smoke and leather welcomed them. Grayson had banked the morning's fire well. A few embers still glowed beneath the ashes. He settled Lila gently onto his narrow bed, her face pale in the dim light. "May, come here by the hearth." He kept his voice low and steady as he worked to revive the fire. "Let's get some warmth back in those fingers of yours." The child huddled close to the growing flames, while Grayson moved about the cabin with practiced efficiency. He lit the oil lamp, its warm glow filling the single room. His medical supplies, hard-won knowledge from his army days, waited in a worn leather bag beneath the counter. Among the herbs and bandages, he found the pine salve he'd made last spring. The fresh, sharp scent filled the air as he opened the jar. Lila stirred restlessly on the bed, her face tight with pain even in sleep. "Your mama's got fever coming on," he told May, keeping his movements slow and deliberate as he approached the bed. "I need to tend these wounds before infection sets in. Can you tell me what happened?" May watched him with solemn eyes, her small hands stretched toward the fire's warmth. "Papa died in the mine last winter. He was good to us, taught Mama to read English, said we'd have a real house someday." Her voice quavered. "But then Mr. Hawkins, he said Papa owed money, made Mama work at the cookhouse. When she tried to leave..." The child's words trailed off. Grayson's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. "Your papa, he was a miner?" May nodded. "He promised Mama freedom, said nobody'd treat her like property anymore." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "But Mr. Hawkins, he treats everybody like property." Working carefully, Grayson cleaned Lila's wounds with water warmed by the fire. The pine salve would help prevent infection and ease some of the pain. Her back bore the worst marks, angry welts that told their own story of cruelty. He covered them with clean bandages, trying to disturb her rest as little as possible. The coffee pot bubbled on the hearth, its familiar aroma filling the cabin. Grayson poured a cup for himself and settled into his chair by the fire. May had finally dozed off, wrapped in his spare blanket near the warmth. But sleep wouldn't come for him tonight. He kept his rifle close, ears tuned to any sound that might carry through the storm. Hours passed. The fire burned low, and Grayson added logs with careful quiet. Lila's breathing gradually steadied as the fever salve did its work. Outside, the storm began to lose its fury, and the first gray light of dawn crept through the cabin's single window. Morning sunlight revealed what the darkness had hidden. Lila's face bore bruises in various stages of healing, evidence that last night hadn't been the first time she'd faced such treatment. May's hunger showed in the way she watched Grayson prepare breakfast, though she didn't ask for anything. He pulled dried jerky from his stores, along with the last of his dried apples. "Here, child, eat your fill." He showed her how to work the tough meat until it softened. "And when you're done, I'll teach you about tending the fire. Every mountain person needs to know that skill." May took to the lesson eagerly, her small face intent as Grayson explained how to layer the wood and control the draft. She worked with careful determination, obviously pleased when the flames responded to her efforts. "That's right," he encouraged. "Let the little pieces catch first, then add the bigger ones gradual-like. Fire's a friend up here, but you got to treat it with respect." A soft sound from the bed drew his attention. Lila's eyes were open, watching them. Pain and wariness showed in her gaze, but there was gratitude there too. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away, but that moment of connection spoke volumes. Grayson moved to check her bandages, explaining each action before he made it. "Fever's broke," he told her, "but you'll need to rest easy for a few days. You're safe here." "For now," Lila whispered, her voice rough from the night's ordeal. He understood her meaning all too well. By sundown, word of their escape would reach the mining camp's foreman. Grayson had dealt with men like that before. They didn't let go of what they considered their property without a fight. While May practiced with the fire, Grayson took his hunting knife to the whetstone. The steady scraping sound filled the cabin as he worked the blade to a razor edge. His mind was already mapping routes deeper into the mountains, planning where they might go if trouble found them here. The morning wore on peacefully enough. May helped him prepare a thin broth, which Lila managed to take in small sips. The child seemed to grow more comfortable with each passing hour, though she never strayed far from her mother's side. Grayson kept busy with small tasks, checking his supplies, patching a hole in the roof where snow had leaked through, always staying within reach of his rifle. But his thoughts remained fixed on the problem at hand. These two souls had been placed in his care, and he meant to honor that trust. Looking at them, May tending the fire with such care, Lila watching her daughter with fierce love despite her pain, Grayson felt something shift in his heart. The solitude he'd wrapped around himself like armor these past years began to crack. Without speaking it aloud, he made a solemn vow. Whatever came next, he would protect them. The day settled into a quiet rhythm. Lila drifted between sleep and waking, her strength slowly returning. May alternated between watching over her mother and helping Grayson with small chores. Though few words passed between them, a sense of trust began to build, fragile as new ice on the creek, but growing stronger with each peaceful hour. From time to time, Grayson stepped outside to check their surroundings. The storm had left everything pristine and white, but he knew that wouldn't last. Trouble would come looking for them soon enough. When it did, he would be ready. Inside the cabin, May had fallen asleep beside her mother, their hands clasped even in rest. Grayson added another log to the fire and resumed his vigil. The knife lay sharp and ready across his knee, and his rifle waited within easy reach. Outside, the winter sun began its slow descent toward evening, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of gold and rose. Dawn crept over the mountain peaks, painting the snow-covered landscape in gentle shades of pink and gold. Inside the cabin, Grayson stirred the morning fire and set about preparing a simple breakfast. The familiar scent of cooking beans and warming cornbread filled the small space. Lila sat propped against the wall, her face drawn with pain. The split in her lower lip had crusted over during the night, making speech difficult. May curled beside her on the bed, exhausted from their ordeal, her small form rising and falling with steady breaths. "Here," Grayson said softly, offering Lila a tin cup of water. "Small sips might help." She took the cup with trembling hands, managing a few careful swallows. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. Her eyes held a mixture of wariness and resignation, as though expecting his kindness to come with a price. Grayson pulled his chair closer, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Ma'am, I know talking's painful, but I need to understand what kind of trouble might be heading our way." Lila's fingers tightened around the cup. She glanced at her sleeping daughter before speaking. "My husband," she began, then paused to wet her lips. "Harlan Beck. He was a good man, different from the others." The name stirred something in Grayson's memory. Talk of a promising silver strike last year, cut short by tragedy. He waited patiently as Lila gathered her strength to continue. "We were married proper, before a preacher in Denver." Her voice grew bitter. "But Harlan, he meant to file the papers, always saying next trip to town." She closed her eyes. "Never did." "What happened to him?" "Mine collapse, last winter." Lila's hand strayed to May's hair, gentle fingers smoothing the dark strands. "Just before he was going to register, his claim." Grayson leaned forward. "Claim?" "Silver seam. Rich one." Her words came faster now, despite the pain. "Harlan found it, kept it quiet, only told the foreman, Mr. Hawkins, thinking to trust him." She gave a small, bitter laugh that turned into a wince. "That trust killed him." The implications settled heavily in Grayson's chest. An unregistered claim, a dead minor, no proof of marriage. It painted an ugly picture. "And afterward?" "Hawkins claimed everything. The seam, the cabin." Her voice dropped even lower. "Me, said without papers I was just property. Tried to arrange a marriage to one of his men." She spat the word like poison. "I refused. Ran. They caught us yesterday." May stirred in her sleep, whimpering. Lila's hand moved instantly to soothe her, though the motion clearly caused her pain. Grayson stood, checking the cornbread in the Dutch oven. "That silver seam, they won't let it go easy." "No." The word held worlds of meaning. He served breakfast on tin plates, helping Lila manage small bites of the soft cornbread. The beans would have to wait until her lip healed more. May woke to the smell of food, eating hungrily despite her obvious efforts to show proper manners. Through the cabin's single window, Grayson watched fresh snow beginning to fall. The weather might buy them time, but they'd need supplies to wait out winter in the high country. His stock was meant for 1, not 3. I need to ride into town, he said finally. We're low on flour, medicine, other necessities. He saw fear flash across Lila's face and added, The storm will cover my tracks. Nobody'll follow me back here. May looked up from her plate, worry creasing her young brow. Will you come back, Mr. Grayson? The question caught him off guard, reminding him painfully of another little girl who'd once asked the same thing. Count on it, he said gruffly, turning away to gather his gear. The ride to Mercy Ridge took longer than usual, the fresh snow making the trail treacherous. By the time Grayson tied his horse outside the mercantile, his beard was frosted and his fingers stiff with cold. The small town seemed quiet, but he felt eyes watching from every window. Inside the store, conversation died as he entered. Mrs. Patterson, the owner's wife, gave him a tight smile from behind the counter. Two miners' wives browsed the dry goods, whispering behind their hands. Grayson ignored them, gathering what he needed: flour, coffee, sugar, bandages, laudanum for Lila's pain. Quite a list, Mr. McCrae, Mrs. Patterson said as she totaled his purchases. Extra mouths to feed up at your cabin? Grayson met her gaze steadily. Just restocking for winter. Behind him, one of the women whispered loud enough to carry, McCrae's hiding a squaw up there. Baker saw him carrying her out of camp last night. He turned slowly, fixing them with a look that had once cowed Apache raiders. The women fell silent, hurrying out into the snow. Mrs. Patterson's hands shook slightly as she wrapped his purchases. Folks talk, Mr. McCrae, she said quietly, and Mr. Hawkins has friends in town. Appreciate the warning. He paid and gathered his supplies, adding, Might want to remind folks that what a man does on his own property is his business. The snow fell harder as he rode home, using a roundabout trail in case anyone tried following. His mind worked through options, none of them good. The law wouldn't help, not without proof of Lila's marriage or Harlan's claim. And Hawkins wouldn't stop until he had both the woman and the silverback under his control. Darkness was falling when Grayson finally reached the cabin. Through the window he saw May tending the fire, as he'd taught her, Lila watching from the bed. Something about that simple scene made his chest ache with familiar loss and new purpose. Inside, he found May had kept the coffee hot and the beans from burning. Good job, child, he said, unpacking his supplies. She beamed at the praise, helping him store everything away. Lila watched silently as he mixed laudanum with water and brought it to her. For the pain, he explained, just a little. Too much will make you sleep too deep. She took the medicine without protest, though her eyes held questions she was too weak to ask. Grayson busied himself with evening chores, checking his rifles, setting traps near the door that would warn of visitors, laying out extra ammunition within easy reach. May helped, until her eyes grew heavy. Grayson showed her how to bank the fire for the night, then watched as she curled up beside her mother. Soon, both were asleep, their breathing steady in the quiet cabin. He took first watch in his chair by the window, rifle across his knees. Outside, snow continued falling, blanketing the world in white silence. But Grayson knew the peace was temporary. Somewhere down in that mining camp, men were planning, waiting for the weather to clear. His fingers moved automatically, checking his weapon, counting ammunition. He'd spent years avoiding other people's troubles, building walls around his solitude. Now those walls were crumbling, and he found he didn't mind as much as he'd expected. The night deepened. Grayson added wood to the fire, its soft crackle a counterpoint to the winter wind. He'd have to make choices soon, stand and fight, or take them deeper into the mountains. But for now, he kept watch, guardian of this small family's fragile sleep. The morning sun cast long shadows across fresh snow as Grayson chopped wood behind his cabin. 2 days had passed since the rescue, and Lila's strength was returning slowly. Inside, he could hear May's cheerful chatter as she helped her mother with breakfast. The crack of a branch made him whirl, axe ready. Through the trees, he spotted a rider approaching, the glint of a badge catching sunlight. Sheriff Cottle. The lawman's horse picked its way carefully through the deep snow. Grayson set the axe against the chopping block and waited, one hand resting near his holster. The sheriff's wooden leg made dismounting awkward, but pride kept the older man from accepting help. "McCrae." Cottle nodded, adjusting his stance in the snow. "Thought I might find you up here?" "Sheriff." Grayson's voice remained neutral. "Long ride in this weather." "Wouldn't have made it if I didn't reckon it important." Cottle's eyes drifted to the cabin's smoking chimney. "Got some complaints from down at the mining camp. Foreman Hawkins says you're harboring his property." Grayson's jaw tightened. "Only property here is mine, Sheriff, and 2 guests who came seeking help." "The woman, she worked their camp. Hawkins claims certain rights." "Claims don't make truth," Grayson cut in. "She's a free woman, not property. Her dead husband was Harlan Beck." Recognition flickered in Cottle's tired eyes. "Beck? The one killed in that collapse last winter?" "Same. They were married proper, she says, in Denver." The sheriff shifted his weight, grimacing as his wooden leg sank slightly in the snow. "Without papers, that's just her word against theirs. And you know how things work in Mercy Ridge, McCrae. Company feeds the town. Town backs the company." "Law's one thing," Grayson said quietly. "What's right's another." Inside the cabin, May's laughter drifted through the walls. Something softened in Cottle's weathered face. "The girl, she doing all right?" "Healing. Both of them are." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Hawkins ain't the type to let this go. He's got men watching the trails. Says that woman knows something about a silver claim Beck found before he died. And if she does, then she's worth more trouble than you might be ready for." Cottle straightened his coat. "I ain't saying what you did was wrong, McCrae. Just warning you. Law around here wears company colors more often than not." "Appreciate the warning." Grayson helped steady the horse as the sheriff mounted awkwardly. "But a man's got to stand somewhere." "Reckon so?" Cottle gathered his reins. "Just hope you're ready for what standing might bring." He touched his hat brim and turned his horse toward town. Grayson watched until the sheriff disappeared into the trees before heading inside. The cabin's warmth wrapped around him, along with the smell of coffee and cornbread. May sat cross-legged by the fire, carefully feeding it small sticks as he'd taught her. Lila looked up from where she sat at the table, her dark eyes questioning. "Sheriff Cottle," he explained, hanging his coat, "bringing warnings about Hawkins and his men." Lila's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "They won't stop looking." "No." Grayson began gathering supplies, ammunition, dried meat, extra blankets. "We need to move deeper into the timber. I know some places they won't find." "No." Lila's voice was firm, despite her injuries. "I won't keep running. My husband died for that silver claim. They killed him for it, I'm certain. I want truth known. Want my marriage? Known." Her eyes met his. "Want my dignity back?" Grayson paused in his packing. May had stopped tending the fire, watching them both with worried eyes. He remembered another time he'd run from trouble, how that choice had haunted him since. "Town preacher might help," he said finally. "Reverend Mills. He's a fair man, keeps records of marriages and such. Might know how to prove your claim legal-like." Hope flickered across Lila's face. "You'd take us to town? After Sheriff's warning?" "First light tomorrow. Need to gather supplies anyway, if we end up having to leave fast." He looked at May. That all right with you, child?" She nodded solemnly. "Mama says God helps those who stand up straight." "Your mama's wise." Grayson turned back to his preparations, but not before catching the ghost of a smile on Lila's lips. They spent the rest of the day readying for whatever might come. Grayson checked his wagon's wheels and axles, packed essential supplies, and cleaned his weapons. Lila and May sorted through what little they'd escaped with, washing clothes and mending tears. The cabin felt different with them there, warmer somehow, despite the winter pressing against its walls. That night, after May was asleep, Lila spoke softly from her bed near the fire. "Why help us, Mr. McCrae? You don't know us. Don't owe us anything." Grayson stared into the flames for a long moment. "Had a wife once, daughter too, lost them to typhoid during the war years." He paused, the old pain familiar as breathing. "Maybe helping you and May. Maybe it's a way of helping them too, doing what I couldn't back then." Lila was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, "Thank you. For saying that. For everything." He nodded, not trusting his voice. Outside, an owl called into the darkness. Eventually, Lila's breathing deepened into sleep, but Grayson stayed awake, watching the fire die down to embers. Dawn came crystal clear and bitterly cold. Grayson hitched his horses to the wagon while May and Lila gathered the last of their things. He'd loaded the wagon carefully, supplies hidden under innocent-looking bundles of furs, weapons within easy reach beneath the seat. "Ready?" he asked as they emerged from the cabin. Lila nodded, holding May's hand. They wore every piece of warm clothing they owned, wrapped in quilts against the morning chill. Grayson helped them up onto the wagon seat, then covered them with another heavy blanket. The forest was silent as they started down the mountain, snow creaking beneath the wagon wheels. Shafts of early light pierced the trees, turning the world to blue and silver. May huddled close to her mother, eyes wide as she watched familiar landmarks slip past. Grayson kept one hand near his rifle as they descended. The trail to town wound through narrow passes and thick timber, perfect places for an ambush. But the morning remained quiet, except for the jingle of harness and the steady crunch of snow. Through gaps in the trees, Mercy, ridge slowly came into view below them. Smoke rose straight up from cabin chimneys in the still air. The mining camp's wooden derricks stood stark against the white hillside. Everything looked peaceful, but Grayson knew better than to trust appearances. "Remember," he said quietly as they approached the outskirts of town, "if trouble starts, you get May to safety. Don't wait for me." Lila's hand found his arm, squeezing once in silent understanding. The touch lingered, warm through his coat sleeve, before she pulled away. The wagon rolled past the first scattered buildings of Mercy Ridge. Early risers paused in their chores to stare. Whispers followed them down the street. Grayson kept his eyes forward, but his senses stretched wide, alert for any threat. They were halfway to the church when he spotted Sheriff Cottle standing outside the mercantile. Their eyes met briefly. The lawman's hand rested on his gun belt, but he made no move to stop them. A promise and a warning in one look. The church stood at the far end of town, its white-painted boards bright in the morning sun. Reverend Mills would be inside, preparing for morning prayers. Grayson hoped the man's reputation for fairness would hold true. They needed allies now more than ever. He pulled the wagon to a stop before the church steps. The town felt like it was holding its breath, watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Grayson helped Lila and May down from the wagon. Together they faced the church doors. Whatever came next, there would be no more running. Sometimes a person had to plant their feet and face what was coming. even if it meant standing alone against the whole world. Or maybe, Grayson thought as May's small hand slipped into his, not so alone after all. The church bells began to toll the hour as they climbed the steps. Behind them, Mercy Ridge stirred to life in the cold morning air. The day had begun, and with it, their stand for truth and justice in a town that had forgotten both. Morning sunlight glinted off fresh snow as Grayson guided the wagon down Mercy Ridge's main street. The town was stirring to life, storekeepers sweeping their boardwalks while ranch hands gathered at the saloon for morning coffee. All movement ceased as they passed. Faces turned, conversations died mid-sentence, and a heavy silence fell over the street. Grayson kept his eyes forward, though he noted every detail. The miners clustering outside the assay office, the telegraph operator peering through his window, the children who stopped their play to stare. Beside him on the wagon seat, May pressed closer to her mother while Lila sat straight-backed, chin lifted, refusing to shrink from the hostile gazes. "Almost there," Grayson murmured, nodding toward the white clapboard church at the end of the street. Its simple cross rose against the mountain backdrop, a reminder of higher laws than those made by men. As they passed the mercantile, Mrs. Henderson dropped her broom with a clatter. "Land sakes," she exclaimed loudly enough for all to hear. "If that McCrae ain't brought himself a savage right into town." Lila's hands tightened in her lap, but she didn't flinch. May looked up at her mother, worry creasing her young face. "Don't pay them no mind," Grayson said quietly. "Folks talk because they don't know better." The church stood apart from the other buildings, its small yard enclosed by a picket fence. A thin trail of smoke rose from its chimney, telling them Reverend Pike was already inside. Grayson pulled the wagon to a stop and set the brake before helping Lila and May down. The child's bare feet had barely touched ground when the church door opened. Reverend Eli Pike stood in the doorway, spectacles catching the morning light. He was a slight man with thinning brown hair and gentle eyes, more suited to books than frontier preaching. His smile faltered as he took in the unlikely trio before him. "Mr. McCrae," he said, nervously adjusting his collar, "this is unexpected." "Reverend," Grayson touched his hat brim, "need your help with a matter of truth and justice, if you can spare the time." Pike's eyes darted past them to the growing crowd of onlookers. Perhaps we should step inside?" The church interior was plain but well kept, its wooden pews gleaming with polish. A pot-bellied stove radiated welcome warmth. May immediately gravitated toward it, holding her small hands out to the heat, while Lila stood uncertainly near the door. "Please, sit." Pike gestured to the front pew, then perched himself on its edge like a sparrow ready to take flight. "How may I be of assistance?" Grayson remained standing, positioning himself where he could watch both the Reverend and the door. "This here's Lila Beck. Her husband was Harlan Beck, worked the Highland mine till his death last month. They were married proper, but seems the papers went missing after Harlan died." "I see." Pike glanced at Lila, then quickly away. "And you're certain of this marriage?" "I am." Lila's voice was soft but firm. "Harlan and I were joined in Christian ceremony at the mission school where I was raised. He promised me a good life, said he'd file our papers proper once we reached the territory. But he never did. No, sir, always tomorrow, always next week." Lila's hands twisted in her skirt. "Then he found silver in his claim. The very next day they said he fell down a shaft, died before I could reach him." Pike's expression showed genuine sympathy, but anxiety too. "This is troubling, but I'm not sure how I can help. Without official documentation." "Reverend," Grayson's quiet voice cut through the man's stammering. You keep records of births, deaths, marriages in these parts? Well, yes, but... And you correspond with other churches? Mission schools? Of course, but... Then you can help prove this lady's marriage was real. Help restore what's rightfully hers. Before Pike could respond, the church door burst open. Sunlight silhouetted a broad-shouldered figure. James Hawkins, the Highland Mine foreman. 3 more men crowded the doorway behind him. Ain't nothing to restore, Hawkins spat. That squaw's a thief and a liar, trying to steal what belongs to the company. Grayson's hand moved closer to his gun, but his voice stayed level. Ma'am's name is Mrs. Beck, and she ain't stealing what's already hers. That claim belongs to Highland Mining. Hawkins took a step forward, boots heavy on the wooden floor. Beck was a fool who got himself killed. Company rules say his stake reverts to us. Rules don't cover murder, Lila said suddenly. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Hawkins's face darkened. Watch your tongue, woman. Accidents happen in mines. Could happen to them protecting you, too. The threat was clear. May whimpered and pressed against her mother's skirts. Grayson shifted, putting himself between Hawkins and the Becks. Threatening folks in God's house now? He asked mildly. Doesn't seem Christian-like to me. Neither does harboring runaways and thieves. Hawkins jerked his chin toward Lila. Hand her over, McCrae. Save yourself some grief. Can't do that. Then you're choosing trouble. Hawkins' hand dropped to his gun belt. The church grew very still. Pike had gone pale, while May buried her face in her mother's dress. Lila stood straight-backed, one hand protective on her daughter's shoulder. Outside, more boots crunched on snow, miners gathering, drawn by the prospect of violence. Seems to me, Grayson said carefully, that threatening women and children in a church is asking for trouble, not choosing it. Enough! The new voice carried authority. Sheriff Cottle pushed through the crowd at the door, his wooden leg thumping against the floorboards. He surveyed the scene with tired eyes. This is a house of worship, he said, not a shooting gallery. Take it outside or take it nowhere. Sheriff. Hawkins turned, spreading his hands. Just trying to recover company property? Lady ain't property, Grayson cut in. She's a widow with legal claim to her husband's stake. We just need time to prove it. Cottle looked between them, the angry foreman, the frightened preacher, the proud woman and her child, the steady-eyed mountain man. His hand rested on his gun belt as he considered. 48 hours, he said finally. You got that long to bring me proof of the marriage, McCrae. Papers, witnesses, whatever you can find. He turned to Hawkins. And you keep your men clear of them till then. This gets settled legal-like, or not at all. Hawkins' jaw worked, but he knew better than to argue with the law, at least in public. 2 days, then. After that, we take what's ours. He stalked out, his men following. The sheriff looked at Grayson. Hope you know what you're doing. Always do, Sheriff. That's what worries me. Cottle thumped toward the door, pausing beside Lila. 48 hours, ma'am. Make them count. When he was gone, Pike seemed to remember how to breathe. Mr. McCrae, I want to help, truly. But the mining company practically owns this town. If I oppose them... Ain't asking you to oppose anyone, Reverend. Grayson's voice was gentle. Just asking you to help find the truth. That's a preacher's job, ain't it? Pike straightened slightly. Yes, I suppose it is. He adjusted his spectacles. I'll send telegrams to the mission schools, see what records I can find. But you should go now, before more trouble starts. Grayson nodded his thanks. He helped Lila and May back to the wagon, conscious of the watching eyes all down the street. As he climbed onto the seat, he touched the brim of his hat to the gathered townsfolk. Much obliged for the welcome, he said clearly. We'll be seeing you all again real soon." The wagon turned toward the mountains, snow crunching under its wheels. Behind them, Mercy Ridge buzzed with gossip and speculation. Ahead, the peaks rose blue and cold against the sky, offering temporary sanctuary. They had 48 hours to prove Lila's claim, or lose everything. May huddled close between them, seeking warmth. "Are we going back to the cabin, Mr. Grayson?" "For now, child," he clucked to the horses. "For now." They left town behind, the morning sun casting their shadows long across the snow. Grayson kept his eyes on the trail, but his mind was already racing ahead, planning their next move. 2 days wasn't much time to prove a marriage, especially when powerful men wanted that proof to stay buried. But looking at Lila's determined face and May's trusting eyes, he knew they had no choice but to try. Sometimes a man had to stand his ground, no matter the odds. Sometimes truth and justice were worth any price. The wagon climbed steadily into the mountains, leaving Mercy Ridge and its troubles below. For the moment, at least, they had bought themselves some time. What they would do with it remained to be seen. Steam rose like ghostly fingers through the snow-laden pines, casting an ethereal haze across the mountainside. Grayson guided the wagon carefully along a nearly invisible trail, the horses' hooves crunching through fresh powder. The old prospector's cabin lay tucked away in a sheltered hollow near the hot springs, its weathered logs almost invisible against the darkening forest. "Almost there," he said softly, noting how May had dozed off against Lila's shoulder. The child stirred at his voice, blinking at the mysterious vapors that wreathed their path. "Are those clouds on the ground, Mr. Grayson?" she asked. "That's steam from the hot springs." He smiled at her wonder. "Nature's own kettle, warming the earth from below." The cabin emerged from the mist, small but sturdy, with a stone chimney and a slight lean to its pine-shake roof. Grayson helped Lila and May down from the wagon, then led the horses to a lean-to shelter beside the building. The structure needed work, but it would serve them better than his exposed mountain cabin while they gathered proof of Lila's marriage. Inside, dust motes danced in the failing light that filtered through grimy windows. The cabin held a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table, and 2 narrow bunks built into the walls. Grayson immediately set to work, clearing cobwebs and checking the chimney for nests. "May, think you could gather some kindling?" he asked. "Stay where I can see you through the window." The girl nodded eagerly, pulling her coat tight before venturing out. Lila moved to help, but Grayson noticed her wince as she stretched her battered ribs. "Ma'am," he said gently, "there's a path marked with stones leading to the hot springs. Might ease those hurts some if you'd care to soak. I'll keep watch here." Lila hesitated, then nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. McCrae, for everything." He watched through the doorway as she followed the steam-warmed path, her figure soon lost in the swirling mist. May returned with an armload of twigs, her cheeks pink with cold and effort. "Look what I found." She held up a handful of late mountain berries, preserved by the snow. "Can we eat them?" "Those are safe," he confirmed, showing her how to arrange the kindling in the fireplace. "Your mama will be proud of your foraging." While May sorted her treasure, Grayson patched the worst leaks in the roof with pine pitch and scraps of canvas. He checked his trapline, finding 2 plump rabbits that would make a good stew. By the time Lila returned, looking more relaxed than he'd yet seen her, the cabin glowed with firelight and smelled of cooking meat. That first night set their pattern for the days that followed. May proved an eager student, watching intently as Grayson showed her how to drill holes through the ice of a nearby pond. Her delighted laugh when she caught her first fish echoed off the snowy peaks, making even Lila smile. "You're a natural," Grayson told May, showing her how to clean her catch. "Quick hands and patience. That's what makes a good fisher person." "Mama, did you see? Did you see my fish?" "I saw." Lila's dark eyes held a warmth that made Grayson's chest tighten strangely. "You're learning well from Mr. McCrae." In return for his lessons, May helped gather firewood and tend the cabin. She had an eye for useful things: shed feathers for fishing flies, straight branches for arrow shafts, even fragments of mica that caught the lamplight like tiny windows. Lila, too, found ways to contribute, despite her healing injuries. She noticed Grayson's coat was wearing thin at the elbows and took up needle and thread without comment. Her skilled fingers worked deerskin patches into the fabric, strengthening without restricting movement. "My mother taught me," she explained when he admired her neat stitching. "She said every piece of work should honor both maker and materials." "Wise woman," Grayson replied. "Wish I'd had such teaching when I was learning to mend my own gear." In the off-and-off evenings, they gathered around the fire's warmth. May would often fall asleep to their quiet conversation, her head pillowed on her mother's lap. Lila spoke of her childhood at the mission school, of learning to bridge two worlds without losing herself in either. Grayson shared safer memories, tracking elk through mountain meadows, watching eagle pairs wheel against summer skies. He found himself watching Lila's face in the firelight, noting how her reserved expression softened when she spoke of her daughter or her people's ways. Sometimes their eyes would meet across May's sleeping form, and something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or simple recognition of kindred wounded souls. Yet even as they settled into this peaceful routine, Grayson remained vigilant. He set subtle warnings around their refuge, threads across likely approaches, branches arranged to snap under intruding feet. Each morning he checked for tracks in the snow, and each evening he made sure their fire threw no telling smoke against the darkening sky. One afternoon, as clouds began building over the peaks, he found Lila at the edge of the hot springs. Steam rose around her like a veil as she stood watching the gathering storm. "Weather's turning," she said without turning. "The wind speaks of snow." "Aye." He moved to stand beside her, respecting the space between them. "Might buy us some time. Hard to track through fresh powder. But we can't hide forever." Her voice held no fear, only quiet certainty. "The mining company won't stop looking." "No, they won't." Grayson studied her profile, strong and dignified despite all she'd endured. "But we'll face that when it comes. For now, you and May are safe here." Lila turned to look at him then, her dark eyes serious. "Why did you help us, Mr. McCrae? You could have walked away that day. Many would have." The question caught him off guard, though he'd asked it of himself many times since that snowy morning. "Reckon sometimes a man doesn't choose his path," he said slowly. "Sometimes the path chooses him." A small smile touched her lips. "My people say something similar, that the Creator sets our feet on the trail we need, not always the one we want." "Your people might be right about that." Grayson looked out at the thickening clouds. "We should get back. May will be wondering where we are." They found the girl had been busy in their absence, having arranged pine boughs into a soft bed near the fire. "For story time," she announced proudly. "Mama always tells the best stories before sleep." That evening, as the wind rose outside and snow began falling in earnest, they huddled close to the hearth. Lila's voice wove tales of clever rabbits and wise grandmothers, while May drifted between waking and dreams. Grayson sat slightly apart, whittling a piece of cedar into a toy horse, but his attention never strayed far from Lila's words or May's peaceful face. The storm grew fiercer as night deepened, rattling the cabin's windows and howling down the chimney. May startled at a particularly loud gust, but Grayson's steady presence and Lila's gentle hand soon soothed her fears. "Time for sleep," Lila murmured, helping May to her bunk. "The storm will watch over us tonight." Once the child was settled, Grayson banked the fire and checked the cabin's defenses one last time. Lila stood at the window, gazing out at the swirling snow. "I've been meaning to thank you," she said softly, "for teaching May. She's never had anyone, any man, be so patient with her." "No thanks needed." Grayson joined her at the window, careful to maintain proper distance. "She's a bright child. Makes teaching her a pleasure." "Still." Lila's hand rose as if to touch his arm, then fell back. "You've given us more than shelter here. You've given us hope." Something in her voice made his throat tighten. "Way I see it, you've given as much as you've received. This place, it hasn't felt like home in a long while. Not till now." Their eyes met in the reflection on the glass, holding a moment before both looked away. Outside, the storm wrapped the cabin in white silence, while inside, the fire's warmth held them safe in their fragile peace. As Grayson settled into his bedroll near the door, he offered up a silent prayer, not for himself, but for time. Time to gather proof of Lila's marriage, time to ensure May's safety, time to protect this unexpected family that had awakened something long dormant in his heart. The snow fell steadily through the night, covering their tracks and sealing their refuge in pristine white. For now, at least, they were hidden from the world's harsh judgment. For now they had this quiet space where healing could take root and trust could grow. May's soft breathing and the fire's gentle crackle filled the darkness. Grayson lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm and thinking of the days ahead. He knew danger would find them eventually. Men like Hawkins didn't let go of their prizes easily. But for this moment, in this place, they had found something precious. A chance at wholeness, a taste of grace. Sleep finally claimed him as the storm began to ease, his last conscious thought a mixture of gratitude and determination. Whatever came next, he would protect what had been given into his care. Some things, he was learning, were worth any price. The peaceful rhythm of their days at the hot springs had lulled them into a fragile sense of security. Grayson spent mornings checking his trap lines while May practiced her fishing, and Lila's bruises slowly faded to yellow beneath her quiet dignity. But on the fifth evening, as they sat around the fire after supper, Lila's hands twisted in her lap, betraying an inner turmoil. "There's something I need to tell you," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the flames. May had already drifted off to sleep on her pine bough bed, her small face peaceful in the firelight. Grayson set aside the arrow he'd been fletching. "I'm listening." Lila drew a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before Harlan died, before they killed him, he found something in the mountains." She glanced at her sleeping daughter before continuing. "A silver seam, richer than any the company had struck. He filed a claim in secret, had it witnessed and signed by the county recorder." The fire popped and settled, sending sparks up the chimney. Grayson waited, sensing there was more. "The night before he died, he told me he'd hidden the deed," Lila continued. "Said it would secure our future, give us a chance to leave the camp for good." Her fingers twisted tighter. "He put it in a hollow cottonwood tree at the edge of town, near the old mission cemetery." "And the foreman found out somehow," Grayson said quietly. It wasn't a question. Lila nodded, tears gleaming unshed in her eyes. Harlan came home excited that last night, said he'd finally worked up the courage to confront them. Next morning, they found him at the bottom of the mine shaft. Called it an accident. Her voice broke. But I knew. The way they looked at me after, like I was property to be claimed along with the mine. Grayson's jaw tightened as pieces fell into place. The foreman's persistence, the town's complicity, the desperate beating they'd given Lila to make her reveal the deed's location. That paper's still there? Unless they found it. But I don't think they have, or they wouldn't still be hunting us. Lila finally met his gaze. The hollow is high up, where two main branches fork. Harlan carved a small cross below it, barely visible unless you know to look. The fire crackled in the silence as Grayson considered. With legal proof of Harlan's claim, Lila could challenge the mining company's theft. But getting to that tree meant riding straight into danger. "I'll go tonight," he said, rising to check his gun belt. "Storm's building. Good cover for moving quiet." Lila stood quickly, her face etched with concern. "No, it's too dangerous. They'll be watching the town, especially at night. Which is why I need to go now, before they expect it." Grayson pulled on his heavy coat. "Storm will hide my tracks, and they'll be huddled inside, not expecting anyone fool enough to ride in this weather." "Please." Lila caught his arm, her touch light but urgent. "I couldn't bear it if—" She stopped, unable to finish. Grayson turned to face her, struck by the fear in her eyes. Not for herself, but for him. "I've moved through worse nights than this," he said gently, "and I've got good reason to come back safe." A small sound made them both turn. May stood beside her bed, blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl. "Are you leaving, Mr. Grayson?" He knelt down to her level, smiling softly. "Just for a little while, Maybird. Got to fetch something important for your mama." The girl's lower lip trembled. "But it's dark and stormy." "That just means the angels are bowling up in heaven," he said, tapping her nose. "Makes fine cover for sneaking about." May threw her arms around his neck, pressing her face into his shoulder. "You have to come back," she whispered fiercely. "Promise?" Grayson hugged her gently, his heart squeezing at her trust. "I promise to do my level best." He stood, meeting Lila's worried gaze. "Keep the fire banked and the door barred. I'll signal 3 short whistles when I return, like a chickadee calling." Lila nodded, drawing May close against her side. "God go with you," she murmured in her native tongue, the words carrying their own kind of prayer. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving pellets of icy snow. Grayson saddled his horse quickly, checking his rifle was well oiled and his pistol loose in its holster. He hung a storm lantern from his saddle horn, its light barely piercing the swirling white. As he mounted, the cabin door opened briefly. May's small figure stood silhouetted against the warm light, her voice carrying clear despite the wind. "Come back, Mr. Grayson." He touched his hat brim in silent promise, then turned his horse toward town. The storm swallowed them quickly, leaving only the lantern's swing to mark their passage through the deepening night. The trail down from the hot springs was treacherous in the dark, but his horse knew the way. Grayson kept his weight centered, trusting the animal's sure-footedness while his mind worked through his plan. The old mission cemetery lay on the town's eastern edge, past the smithy but before the miners' bunkhouses. If he approached from the creek bed, the cottonwoods would provide cover. Snow gathered on his shoulders as they descended, the wind's moan drowning all other sounds. His lantern cast weird shadows through the blowing white, making the familiar trail seem strange and shifting. But faith steadied his heart, faith in his horse's step, in the rightness of his mission, in the warm light of home where Lila and May waited. The storm wrapped him in its wild embrace, while somewhere ahead, a hollow tree held hope in its keeping. Grayson rode on through the darkness, letting that hope guide him like a star. Behind him, two faces pressed against the cabin's window, watching until his lantern's glow vanished completely into the night. Their breath fogged the glass as they whispered prayers into the storm, one in English, one in Comanche, both carrying the same desperate wish for his safe return. The night deepened around them all, full of secrets and dangers yet to come. But for now, there was only the storm's song, the horse's steady stride, and the quiet certainty that some treasures were worth any risk to reclaim. Grayson straightened in his saddle, squaring his shoulders against the wind. Whatever waited in town, he would face it. The time for hiding was past. Now was the hour for courage, for justice, for making right what greed and hatred had broken. His lantern swung in rhythm with his horses, gait, a pendulum marking time between what was and what might be. Through the flying snow, he rode on toward Mercy Ridge, carrying more than just his own fate in his keeping. The storm raged on, erasing his tracks almost as soon as they were made. But his path was set now, straight as an arrow's flight, toward the hollow tree that held the key to their future. The snow-laden wind howled through the trees as Grayson guided his horse down the final slope toward Mercy Ridge. His storm lantern cast a weak circle of light through the darkness, barely illuminating the path ahead. The temperature had dropped sharply, turning the falling snow to stinging sleet that rattled against his coat like thrown pebbles. He kept to the shadows of the creek bed, where bare willows provided some cover from watching eyes. The familiar shapes of town buildings emerged through the storm. The livery stable, the mercantile's false front, the church steeple rising like a dark finger against the night sky. Somewhere beyond lay the old mission cemetery and the cottonwood that held their hopes. His horse's hooves made soft, sucking sounds in the half-frozen mud as they picked their way forward. Grayson's fingers had grown stiff inside his gloves, and he flexed them to keep the blood flowing. The bullet wounds he'd taken years ago always ached fierce in weather like this, as if his body remembered every fight he'd rather forget. The creek bent eastward here, and Grayson followed its course past the silent smithy. No smoke rose from any chimney. The storm had driven everyone indoors, just as he'd hoped. Even the saloon windows were dark. Only an occasional lamp burned in upstairs rooms, dim shapes moving behind frost-rimed glass. At last, the cemetery's wrought iron gates appeared through the swirling white. Grayson dismounted, leading his horse into the shelter of a grove of young pines. He wrapped the reins around a low branch, patting the animal's neck. "Stay quiet now," he murmured. Taking the lantern, he moved carefully between the weathered headstones. The wind had sculpted the snow into deep drifts that threatened to swallow his boots. Near the eastern fence line stood the massive cottonwood Lila had described, its bare branches creaking overhead like old bones. Grayson raised his lantern, scanning the trunk where the main fork split. There, a faint cross carved into the bark, nearly hidden by years of growth. His heart quickened as he reached up, probing the hollow with gloved fingers. Something metal scraped against his touch. He had to stretch to his full height, balanced on his toes, to work the object free. It was a small tin, the kind that once held tobacco, now sealed tight with wax. Grayson tucked it quickly inside his coat and lowered the lantern, letting darkness shroud him once more. The crack of a twig breaking made him freeze. "Well, look what we caught ourselves," a harsh voice drawled. "The mountain man, come down to play hero." Two figures emerged from behind neighboring headstones, rifles aimed at his chest. Grayson recognized them as Murphy and Dawes, the foreman's favorite enforcers. Their breath steamed in the lamplight as they moved to flank him. "Hand over whatever you just took from that tree," Murphy ordered. "Nice and slow." Grayson's hand drifted toward his hip, but Dawes jerked his rifle higher. "Don't even think about it, McCrae. Drop the gun belt." Time seemed to slow as Grayson weighed his options. The tin pressed against his ribs like a burning coal. These men wouldn't hesitate to kill him. They'd done worse for less. But without the deed, Lila and May would have no protection from the mining company's greed. In one fluid motion, Grayson hurled the lantern at Murphy's face. Glass shattered as Murphy stumbled backward, cursing. Grayson dove behind a tombstone as Dawes' rifle cracked, the bullet spraying stone chips where his head had been. He drew his revolver as he rolled, squeezing off 2 quick shots to keep them down. Another bullet whined past his ear as he sprinted between the graves, zigzagging toward the cemetery gate. His boots slipped on the icy ground, but desperation drove him forward. More shots followed, echoing off the buildings. A line of fire suddenly blazed across his left arm, not deep, but enough to make him stumble. Grayson caught himself against a wall, ducking into the narrow alley between the general store and the assay office. Shouts rose behind him as Murphy and Dawes gave chase. Grayson pressed on through the darkness, one hand clamped over his bleeding arm. He knew these backways from his supply runs, knew where loose boards and empty barrels might betray him. Each step had to count. The church loomed ahead, its stable a deeper shadow against the night. Grayson slipped inside just as heavy boots pounded past the alley's mouth. The familiar smell of hay and horse sweat wrapped around him as he pressed himself flat against the wall, listening. "Where'd he go?" Murphy's voice carried clearly. "Split up," Dawes answered. "Check the boarding house. He's hurt. He won't get far." Their footsteps faded in opposite directions. Grayson allowed himself to breathe again, though his arm throbbed with every heartbeat. The bullet had only grazed him, but blood was soaking his sleeve. A soft scuff made him raise his revolver again. "Peace, friend," came a whispered voice. "It's just me." Reverend Pike stepped out from behind a stall, holding up empty hands. The preacher's face was pale in what little light filtered through the stable's weathered boards, but his eyes were steady. "Saw the lantern light in the cemetery," Pike explained quietly. "Then heard the shots. You're bleeding." Grayson lowered his gun slowly. "Just a scratch. Need to bind it and ride." "Let me help." The Reverend moved to a shelf, returning with clean cloths and a bottle of whiskey. "I keep supplies here for emergencies. Too many folks come to the church when they can't. Go elsewhere." As Pike cleaned and wrapped his arm, Grayson fought to slow his racing thoughts. The deed was safe in his coat, but he had to get it to the land office before the mining company could stop them, and now the foreman's men would be watching every trail out of town. "Reverend," he said suddenly, "could you send a telegram for me? To the county land office in Denver?" Pike's hands stilled for a moment. "You found proof of the claim?" Grayson nodded. "Legal deed. Signed and witnessed. But if something happens to me before I can file it..." "Say no more." Pike tied off the bandage. "I'll send it first thing tomorrow. Tell them to expect either you or the document by post." He met Grayson's eyes. "God's hand is in this, friend. Justice will prevail." "Pray you're right." Grayson checked his revolver, making sure no snow had fouled the action. "I need to go. They'll search here eventually." "Wait." Pike hurried to his small desk, scribbling on a piece of paper. "The telegraph office's address in Denver, and a message they'll understand. That fraud is suspected in a claim transfer." He pressed the note into Grayson's hand. "Go with God's speed. Grayson tucked the paper away with the deed. "Thank you, Reverend. Whatever happens, you're a good man." He slipped out the stable's back door into the pre-dawn darkness. The storm was beginning to ease, the sky lightening to pearl gray in the east. Fresh snow had covered his tracks from earlier, but it would also reveal any new trail he made. His horse nickered softly as he approached, still waiting patiently in the pine grove. Grayson mounted carefully, favoring his injured arm. The deed rode secure against his chest, a weight heavier than its size would suggest. So much hope, so many lives, bound up in one piece of paper. Dawn was coming. Soon the whole town would know what had happened in the cemetery. The foreman would send more men, probably call in the sheriff too. But Grayson had what they wanted now, proof of their murder and theft, wrapped in tin and sealed with wax. He turned his horse's head toward the mountain trails, away from the silent town and the hollow tree that had kept its secret so long. The first fingers of sunrise touched the steeple cross behind him, making it glow like a star fallen to earth. "Lord," Grayson whispered, "if you're still listening to the likes of me, help us find justice. Help me get this deed where it needs to go." The horse picked up a steady trot as they left town, hooves breaking through the fresh snow. Grayson kept his eyes on the trail ahead, focused on the cabin where Lila and May waited. Dawn painted the clouds rose and gold, but he knew the real light, the light of hope and healing, lay in the simple truth he carried close to his heart. Behind him, Reverend Pike stood in the stable doorway, watching until horse and rider vanished into the brightening day. His lips moved in silent prayer as he prepared to face whatever consequences might come from helping justice find its way home. The morning wind caught the fresh snow, lifting it in sparkling veils across the empty cemetery. Somewhere in the distance, a chickadee called, 3 short whistles, clear and bright against the coming day. The winter sun hung pale and distant in the afternoon sky as Grayson guided his horse along the snow-covered trail toward Fort Garland. His wounded arm throbbed beneath the bandage, but the deed pressed reassuringly against his chest with each step. The mountain path wound through stands of bare aspen trees, their white trunks stark against the deep blue shadows of the canyon. At midday, he reached a half-frozen creek, where ice-rimmed water still tumbled over moss-covered rocks. Grayson dismounted stiffly, letting his horse drink while he checked his arm. The bandage showed spots of fresh blood, but the wound had mostly stopped seeping. He cupped his hands in the frigid water, splashing his face to stay alert. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the winter silence. Grayson dove behind a boulder as splinters flew from a tree beside him. His horse reared and bolted up the trail, taking his supplies with it. More shots rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. Through gaps in the rocks, he counted 5 riders emerging from the trees, the foreman's men, led by Murphy with his bandaged face still showing burns from the lantern. "Got nowhere to run now, McCrae," Murphy shouted. "Give up the deed and maybe we'll let you walk away." Grayson's revolver cleared leather as he fired back, forcing them to scatter. But they had the high ground, and his position behind the boulder left him trapped against the creek. A bullet ricocheted off stone inches from his head, showering him with chips. "Last chance," Murphy called, "or we drag you back the hard way." Grayson's response was 2 rapid shots that unseated one of the riders. The man crashed into the snow with a cry, clutching his shoulder. But as Grayson turned to face a new threat, something heavy struck the back of his head. Stars exploded across his vision as he stumbled forward. Dawes had circled behind him through the creek bed. The rifle butt came down again, and Grayson fell hard onto the frozen ground. Boots crunched in the snow around him as rough hands seized his arms. Through blurred vision, he saw Murphy dismount and stride forward. "Search him," Murphy ordered. "Find that deed." Grayson struggled weakly as they tore open his coat. The tin box clattered onto stones, slick with his blood. Murphy snatched it up with a triumphant grin. "Looks like our Indian friend's husband was keeping secrets after all," he said, pocketing the box. "Throw him on a horse. The boss will want words with him back in town." They bound Grayson's hands and hauled him onto a spare mount. His head swam with each movement, consciousness fading in and out as they started the long ride back to Mercy Ridge. The afternoon sun cast their shadows long and dark across the snow-covered trail. Miles away, the gunshots had echoed through the valley like distant thunder. In the cabin by the hot springs, Lila froze at the sound, her hands stilling on the quilt she was mending. May looked up from where she was playing with carved wooden animals near the hearth. "Mommy?" May's voice quavered. "Was that—" "Hush, little one." Lila moved to the window, scanning the white-shrouded mountains. Her heart pounded as she counted the shots, trying to judge their direction. Just stay inside." But as the short winter day faded toward dusk, no rider appeared through the falling snow. Lila paced the cabin, touching the crosses, both Christian and Comanche, that hung from her neck. She whispered prayers in 2 languages while May huddled closer to the fire, clutching her wooden toys. The attack came just after nightfall. The cabin door burst inward with a crash of splintering wood. May screamed as men with lanterns poured inside. Lila tried to run for the back door, but rough hands seized her arms. She fought like a cornered wolf, kicking and clawing until someone struck her across the face. "None of that now," the foreman's voice cut through the chaos. "You're coming back to town to answer for your lies, you and the brat both." "No!" Lila struggled harder as 2 men grabbed May. "Leave her alone, she's just a child." "Should have thought of that before you stole what wasn't yours," the foreman said coldly. "But don't worry, the whole town's going to see justice done tonight." They dragged mother and daughter out into the swirling snow. Horses waited in the darkness, steam rising from their flanks. The men lashed Lila's hands behind her back and threw her onto a saddle. May's terrified sobs cut through the wind as they started down the mountain trail. The ride to town passed in a nightmare blur of cold and fear. Snow filled Lila's eyes as she prayed desperately for help, for mercy, for some sign of Grayson. But only darkness answered as they clattered down Mercy Ridge's empty main street. Light blazed from the windows of the mining company office as they were forced inside. The foreman sat behind his desk, a tin box open before him. Murphy stood nearby, sporting fresh bandages on his burned face. Other miners crowded the room, reeking of whiskey and violence. "Well, well," the foreman said, holding up the deed. "Looks like your dead husband left quite a legacy. Too bad he never filed this properly." He fed the paper into the potbelly stove, watching it catch fire. "Now, about your punishment." "You murdered him," Lila spat, straining against the men holding her. "You killed Harlan for that claim." The foreman's face hardened. "Bring McCrae in. Let him see what happens to thieves and troublemakers in this town." 2 miners dragged Grayson through the door. His face was bruised and bloody, but his eyes found Lila's immediately. The look that passed between them held volumes of unspoken fear and regret. "Take them all to the stable," the foreman ordered. "We'll let the whole town witness their justice come morning." They were marched through thickening snow to the livery stable. The smell of hay and horses filled the cold air as they were thrown roughly onto the straw-covered floor. May curled against her mother, shivering with cold and terror. Grayson slumped against a post, barely conscious. "Mr. Grayson?" May whispered. "Are you hurt bad?" I'm sorry, he managed, his voice rough. I tried to make it right. Quiet in there, a guard's voice shouted from outside. The stable door slammed shut, leaving them in darkness broken only by thin moonlight through the gaps in the walls. Lila shifted closer to Grayson, trying to see his wounds in the dim light. What happened? Did they... Ambushed me at the creek, he murmured. Got the deed. Burned it now. His head drooped. Failed you both. No. Lila touched his arm gently. You risked everything to help us. That means more than any paper. May sniffled between them. What are they going to do to us, Mommy? Lila pulled her daughter close, meeting Grayson's pained gaze over the child's head. They both knew what morning might bring. The foreman's brand of frontier justice dealt out before a cowed and helpless town. Outside, the snow fell thicker, blanketing Mercy Ridge in deep winter silence. Guards paced before the stable doors, their boots creaking in the fresh powder. In the saloon across the street, miners drank and waited for dawn, their laughter carrying cruel and sharp through the night air. Inside the stable, 3 prisoners huddled together in the darkness, a broken family forged by violence and mercy, bound now by shared fear and fading hope. May eventually drifted into uneasy sleep, but Lila and Grayson kept vigil through the long hours, watching frost creep across the small window like delicate fingers of ice. Neither spoke of what morning might bring. They simply waited, drawing what comfort they could from each other's presence as the night deepened around them. Somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote howled, a mournful sound that echoed off the mountains and faded into silence. The town of Mercy Ridge slept uneasily beneath its blanket of snow, while in the stable, 3 souls prayed for deliverance from the justice that awaited them with the dawn. Grayson's eyes flickered open to cold stone and iron bars. Every breath sent daggers through his ribs where Murphy's boots had found their mark. Moonlight filtered through a small window high in the jail cell, casting silver patterns on the frozen floor. The town was silent except for the soft whisper of falling snow. He pushed himself up against the wall, wincing. His face felt swollen, caked with dried blood from the beating. The sheriff had ordered his wounds cleaned, at least, a small mercy that spoke to the man's conflicted heart. But clean bandages wouldn't save him from what morning would bring. The creak of boots on wooden floors drew his attention. Sheriff Cottle appeared from the shadows, lamplight catching on his silver badge. The lawman's weathered face was drawn with worry as he studied his prisoner through the bars. You should have stayed in your mountains, McCrae, Cottle said quietly. Some fights ain't worth dying for. Grayson spat blood onto the floor. That what you tell yourself, Sheriff? When you look the other way while they beat women and steal claims? Watch your tongue. But there was no heat in Cottle's warning. He shifted his weight off his bad leg, the wooden peg clicking against the floorboards. Mine owners pay the taxes that keep this town alive. Pay my salary, too. Man can't fight the whole world. Man can fight for what's right, Grayson countered. He pulled himself straighter despite the pain. You wear that badge, Sheriff. Don't let it own you. Something flickered in Cottle's tired eyes. Shame, perhaps, or memory of younger days when the law meant justice, not convenience. But he turned away, lamp swinging with his uneven gait. Get some rest, McCrae. Trial set for morning, such as it is. He paused at the door. For what it's worth. I'm sorry it came to this. Then he was gone, leaving Grayson alone in the dark cell. The night pressed in close, heavy with silence and the weight of coming dawn. Pain throbbed through his body, each heartbeat a reminder of his failure. He'd tried to save Lila and May, to right an old wrong, but now they were all trapped in the foreman's web. Grayson closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, Words of prayer rose unbidden to his lips. The psalm his wife used to read their daughter came back to him, whispered now against cold stone. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." His voice grew stronger with each verse, filling the empty cell with ancient promises of deliverance. The words echoed off the walls like the ghost of hope itself. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." Outside, snow continued to fall in thick curtains, burying Mercy Ridge's streets in white silence. The saloon's windows glowed orange through the storm, the foreman and his men drinking to their victory, no doubt. Somewhere in town, Lila and May huddled in their own cell, waiting for whatever justice morning would bring. The midnight hour crept past like molasses in winter. Grayson had dozed fitfully when soft footsteps roused him. A dark figure appeared beyond the bars, and he tensed, but it was Reverend Pike's gentle face that emerged from shadow. "Mr. McCrae," the preacher whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "I've brought you something to eat." And, he pulled a familiar tin box from beneath his coat. "This fell during the fight. I recovered it before anyone saw." Grayson's heart leaped. He reached through the bars to take the box containing Lila's deed. "Reverend, you're risking much coming here. The risk is nothing compared to standing idle while evil triumphs." Pike's voice trembled but held firm. "I've arranged safe passage for Mrs. Beck and the child, if you can find a way out. A friend with a wagon will be waiting behind the church at dawn." "You're a braver man than most give you credit for, Reverend." Grayson gripped the preacher's hand through the bars. "God bless you for this." Pike squeezed back, then pressed a small bundle of food through the bars. "Be careful, Mr. McCrae. And go with God." The preacher melted back into the shadows as quietly as he'd come. Grayson waited until his footsteps faded completely before moving. He pulled his right boot off, grimacing at the pain the movement caused. From a hidden seam in the leather, he extracted a slim metal file, a precaution born of years living beyond the law's reach. Hope surged through his veins as he examined the cell's bars. They were old, worn thin by rust and time. One near the bottom looked particularly promising. He began to work the file against it, trying to muffle the sound as much as possible. The hours crept by as he sawed at the iron. His hands grew raw and bleeding, but he pressed on. The psalm still echoed in his mind, keeping time with each scrape of the file. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." Dawn was still hours away when the bar finally gave way with a quiet snap. Grayson sat back, breathing hard from the effort. He tucked the precious deed box into his shirt and waited, listening for any sign his work had been discovered. But only the soft hiss of falling snow answered. A wan smile crossed his battered face as he touched the broken bar. After years of believing God had abandoned him, here was proof of divine mercy, delivered through a gentle preacher's courage and a hidden file. Perhaps faith, like hope, was never truly lost, only waiting to be rediscovered in the darkest hours. He settled back against the wall to rest and plan his next move. The deed was secure, and escape was now possible. But the real test would come with morning's light. Somehow he had to reach Lila and May, then get them to the waiting wagon before the foreman's men discovered his empty cell. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing tracks and smoothing the rough edges of Mercy Ridge. Tomorrow would bring either deliverance or disaster. For now, Grayson kept vigil in his cell, warming his soul with remembered psalms, while his body gathered strength for the trial ahead. The tool that had bought his freedom lay hidden once more in his boot. The broken bar stood ready, and in his heart, long dormant faith stirred to life again, as steady and sure as the mountain streams that never ceased their flow beneath winter's ice. The pale winter sun crept over Mercy Ridge's frosted rooftops. Two of the foreman's men marched Lila and May through the ankle-deep snow, their boots leaving dark prints in the pristine white. The crowd parted as they approached the wagon post in the middle of Main Street, whispers rippling through the gathered townsfolk like wind through prairie grass. "Here's your thief," the foreman bellowed, his voice cutting through the crisp morning air. He yanked Lila's arms roughly behind the post while his men bound her wrists with coarse rope. May trembled beside her mother, small fingers clutching Lila's skirts. Lila lifted her chin, meeting the foreman's mocking gaze with quiet dignity. Her dark eyes held neither fear nor hatred, only a deep, unwavering certainty. She turned to May, her voice soft but steady. "The truth will outlive the wicked," she whispered in her native tongue, the ancient words a shield against their cruelty. Meanwhile, in his cell, Grayson gripped the loosened bar with bleeding hands. His muscles screamed as he wrenched it free with one final twist. The narrow window barely allowed his shoulders through, but desperation lent him strength. He dropped into the snow-filled alley, biting back a groan as his battered body protested. Keeping to the shadows, he limped toward the church. Each step crunched in the fresh snow, making him wince. The growing crowd at the town center told him time was running short. Women clutched their shawls tight, men shifted uneasily, and children peered around their parents' legs at the spectacle. The church bell began to toll, its deep voice counting out the hour of noon. Each resonant strike echoed off the surrounding mountains, marking the moments until the foreman's promised punishment. Grayson quickened his pace, ignoring the fire in his ribs. He had to reach them before that final bell fell silent. The church bell's final toll hung in the frigid air as Grayson McCrae burst into the street. Blood trickled from his temple, staining his collar crimson. In one hand he gripped a worn leather Bible. In the other, he clutched the precious deed. His sudden appearance sent a ripple of gasps through the crowd. "Enough!" his voice thundered across the square. "This ends now!" The foreman's hand twitched toward his gun, but Grayson stood his ground. Sheriff Cottle shifted uneasily, his badge catching the winter sunlight. "Read it," Grayson commanded, thrusting the marriage certificate at the foreman. "Read every word aloud, so all can hear the truth you buried with Harlan Beck." The foreman's lip curled in contempt, but something in Grayson's steady gaze made him take the paper. His eyes widened as he scanned the document. "Read it," Sheriff Cottle echoed, his voice heavy with newfound resolve. The foreman cleared his throat. "This certifies that on the 15th day of April, 1880, Harlan James Beck did lawfully wed Lila of the people in the presence of witnesses." His voice faltered. A murmur swept through the crowd. Women covered their mouths in shock. Men shuffled their feet in the snow, avoiding each other's eyes. Grayson raised the deed next, its official seal gleaming. "And here's the silver claim, signed and witnessed. The land belongs to Harlan Beck's widow, to Lila." Sheriff Cottle's decision crystallized in that moment. With deliberate slowness, he drew his revolver. But instead of aiming at Grayson, he leveled it at the foreman's chest. "You're done," the sheriff said quietly, his words carrying across the hushed street. In that moment, truth and justice prevailed not through violence, but through one man's unwavering courage to stand for what was right. The foreman's face twisted with rage. His hand shot to his holster, fingers closing around the pearl grip of his pistol. But Grayson was faster. With one swift motion, he knocked the weapon away, sending it spinning across the muddy street. The foreman lunged forward with a snarl, but Grayson caught him, driving him down into the cold mud. "You had your chance to be a man," Grayson said, his voice low and steady as he pinned the struggling foreman. "Chose greed instead of grace." Sheriff Cottle stepped forward, iron cuffs gleaming. "You're under arrest for the murder of Harlan Beck," he announced, securing the foreman's wrists. The townspeople drew closer, shame evident on their faces. "We're sorry, Mrs. Beck," a woman whispered, touching Lila's arm. Others nodded, murmuring their own apologies. Reverend Pike emerged from the crowd, his Bible clasped to his chest. His voice quavered but grew stronger as he spoke. "Let us thank the Lord for revealing truth and granting freedom to this family." He raised his hands in blessing over Lila, who stood tall despite her trembling shoulders. Tears spilled down Lila's cheeks as she turned to Grayson. "Thank you," she whispered, her words carrying more weight than any lengthy speech could convey. May broke free from her mother's side and ran to Grayson, throwing her small arms around his waist. "We're free, Mr. Grayson," she said, her face glowing with joy. "We're really free." Soft snowflakes began drifting down from the pewter sky, as if nature itself was washing away the stains of injustice. Together, Grayson, Lila, and May walked away from the crowd, toward the whitewashed church. Its windows glowed with warm lamplight, beckoning them toward sanctuary and a fresh beginning. The mountain snow melted into spring streams as Lila stood before the charred remains of the old chapel. With papers in hand from the Silver Claims sale, she purchased the building from the town council. Hope bloomed in her eyes as she surveyed the blackened timbers and broken windows. Grayson worked alongside her from sunrise to sunset. His strong hands guided fresh-cut pine boards into place, while Lila mixed whitewash for the walls. The steady rhythm of his saw and hammer filled the warming air, drowning out old memories of gunfire and shouts. Sheriff Cottle visited nearly every day, his wooden leg thumping against the new floorboards as he hauled supplies. "Never thought I'd see this place shine again," he said, watching May skip through the garden they'd planted. Inside, the mission house grew warm with life. Reverend Pike sat at a rough-hewn table, teaching May her letters while other children gathered round. Her small finger traced across the pages, voice clear and sweet as she sounded out each word. When evening fell, May's voice led the others in hymns. The sound drifted through open windows, across the town square where miners paused their work to listen. Lila moved among the widows and orphans who'd found shelter there, serving soup and sharing quiet words of comfort. Grayson leaned in the doorway, a subtle smile softening his weathered face. Peace had found him at last, not in mountain solitude, but in service to others. He watched Lila tend to their growing family of lost souls, her gentle strength drawing them all together. Mercy Ridge changed with each passing day. Neighbors spoke more kindly to one another. Gardens appeared where dust had been. The mission's hearth became the heart of the town, its warmth and laughter healing old wounds and building new bridges between former enemies. Golden evening light spilled across the chapel porch as Grayson McCrae's knife moved steadily over pine wood. Curls of fresh shavings gathered at his feet, while the toy horse took shape beneath his careful hands. The warm spring breeze carried the scent of lilacs from the garden where children played. The screen door creaked softly. Lila stepped out carrying 2 tin cups of steaming coffee, her shawl draped loosely around her shoulders. She handed one to Grayson and settled beside him on the wooden bench, watching his skilled fingers work the grain. "The detail you put into these carvings," she said, admiring the horse's emerging features. May treasures each one. Grayson nodded, his weathered face softening. Reminds me of making them for Sarah before... His voice trailed off, but the old pain had gentled with time. Lila sipped her coffee, letting the silence settle comfortably between them. I visited Harlan's grave yesterday, she said after a while. Put fresh wildflowers there. The marker you carved tells his story proper now. Husband, father, man of faith. He deserved that much, Grayson replied, carefully shaping the horse's mane. And more. God's mercy works in strange ways, Lila mused, watching the sunset paint the chapel walls rose gold. Through Harlan's death came new life for so many here. She gestured toward the mission house, where lamplight glowed in windows and voices murmured inside. May burst from the garden, her dark braids flying as she chased a butterfly. When it fluttered away, she bounded onto the porch, eyes bright with curiosity at Grayson's carving. Is it done yet, Mr. Grayson? She asked, leaning against his knee to peer at the wooden horse. He smiled, showing her the nearly finished figure. Almost. Run along and play. It'll be ready by bedtime. As May skipped back to her friends, Lila turned to study Grayson's profile in the fading light. I never asked you properly, she said softly. Why did you help us that day? When May found you in the storm? Grayson's hands stilled on the carving. His gaze drifted toward the mountains, their peaks still crowned with snow against the darkening sky. After a long moment he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Because when you cried, I heard my little girl again. God gave me another chance to listen. Lila's hand found his, squeezing gently. Understanding passed between them without words. The shared weight of loss, the healing found in helping others, the quiet miracle of second chances. Inside the chapel, bells began to ring, their clear tones calling townsfolk to evening service. People emerged from homes and shops, walking unhurried through the spring twilight. Women in their Sunday best, miners with freshly washed faces, children running ahead while parents called them back. Mercy Ridge spread out below them, windows beginning to glow with lamplight. Peace settled over the town like a blessing, so different from the bitter place it had been months before. Where violence and greed once ruled, now mercy flowed like the spring streams tumbling down from snowmelt. Grayson set aside the finished horse and bowed his head, his prayer a whisper on the evening breeze. Thank you, Lord, for second chances, for showing this old scout there's still good work to be done. The last rays of sun caught the chapel's new white walls, making them shine like pearl. Through open windows came the sound of hymns beginning, voices rising sweet and strong. May's clear notes soared above the rest, singing of grace and redemption. Lila stood, brushing wood shavings from her skirt. Shall we go in? Grayson nodded, tucking the carved horse safely in his pocket for later. Together they walked toward the warm light spilling from the chapel doors, their shadows merging in the gathering dusk. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal witness to God's mysterious ways, how healing could spring from hurt, and family could be found in the most unexpected places. Inside, the congregation welcomed them with smiles and nods. Sheriff Cottle touched his hat brim, Reverend Pike beamed from the pulpit, and May patted the empty space beside her on the wooden pew. As Grayson settled into his place among these people who had become his family, gratitude filled his heart like a quiet song. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.